Jackson, Mississippi. It was the kind of southern spring morning that made you forget sorrow ever existed. Sunlight spilled across the cracked sidewalks of Washington Avenue. Birds chirped somewhere off near the sycamore trees, and the old Mount Olive Baptist Church stood proud, its white paint peeling just enough to feel honest. Marcus Dean wiped the sweat from his brow as he knelt in the flower bed, pressing fresh marigolds into the soil with weathered hands. 52 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, Marcus looked like the kind of man who could fix your roof, carry your groceries, and break your heart, all in one breath. But these days, he didn't do much of anything except tend to the church grounds and go home to a quiet house with too many memories and not enough noise. He hadn't always been this still. 6 years ago, before cancer took Lorraine, Marcus was a man of movement. Road trips, barbecues, family reunions, laughter that echoed off the walls. Lorraine had been the light in every dark room. When she died, so did something inside him. Folks at church had long since stopped trying to fix him up. Pastor Willis gave it one last go after Sunday service that week. "Brother Marcus," the pastor said, gripping his shoulder with that fatherly firmness, "you got too much heart to let it dry up alone. God didn't make no man to walk this road by himself." Marcus gave him a quiet smile, the kind that says, "Thank you," and "Don't bother," all at once. But fate, or whatever name you give it, wasn't done with Marcus Dean. It happened on a Tuesday. He was pumping gas at the Shell station on McBride and Eastover when a cherry red Honda pulled in beside him. The woman who stepped out had legs for days, a honeyed voice, and an air of polished mystery. She wore a lavender dress that clung just right and sunglasses too big for her delicate face. "Excuse me," she called, her tone polite but edged with charm. "You from around here?" Marcus nodded, capping his gas tank. "Born and raised. I'm looking for Canal Street." GPS done lost its mind. He chuckled and pointed. "One left turn and a prayer. But I can show you if you're really lost." She smiled, full lips parting with just a hint of teasing. "Depends. You always this helpful to strangers?" "Only the ones wearing lavender." They talked for 15 minutes like they'd known each other for years. Her name was Celeste Monroe. She just moved to town from Baton Rouge. Said she was working remote in digital communications, which Marcus didn't really understand, but figured it paid the bills. When she pulled away, she left the scent of vanilla and unanswered questions in the air. He stood there for a while after she left, like a man who just witnessed a comet. He saw her again 2 days later, intentionally this time. He drove past that same gas station on his lunch break, like maybe she'd materialize again. And there she was this time at the corner cafe across the street, sipping iced tea with a book in hand. "Twice in 1 week?" Marcus asked, stepping into her line of sight. Celeste looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Maybe I'm just where I'm supposed to be." From there it bloomed. Dinner at Southern Spoon. Walks through LaFleur's Bluff. Nights on his porch with jazz, playing low and her head on his shoulder. She listened more than she talked, but when she did speak, her voice had weight. Like someone who'd carried secrets but made peace with them. His sister warned him. "You don't know her," she said flatly over the phone one night. "You're falling too fast." "I've fallen slower and ended up more broken," Marcus replied. By the 8th week, he felt like himself again. Like maybe the sun wasn't so cruel anymore. He reached into his pocket one evening and pulled out a modest gold ring. They were on that same church porch where he'd buried Lorraine, where he'd buried himself, too. "Celeste," he said, his voice low but firm, "you make me want to live again. That might not mean much to most folks, but to me, that's everything. Will you marry me?" Celeste's eyes welled with tears. She looked away for a moment, like she was deciding whether to run or leap. "You sure you want all this baggage, Marcus?" she whispered. "Baggage don't scare me," he said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "I've carried grief. I can carry love, too." She kissed him then. Softly, slowly, with a kind of tenderness he hadn't felt in years. And just like that, Marcus Dean, broken-hearted, guarded, grieving, was back on the road to forever. He just didn't know what kind of destination was waiting for him. The wedding came faster than anyone expected, especially Marcus. It was held on a humid Saturday afternoon beneath the arch of crepe myrtles behind Mount Olive Baptist Church. Celeste wore an ivory dress with lace sleeves and a long satin train that swept gently across the grass. Her hair was pinned up, small pearl clips holding back curls that bounced with every step. She looked like a woman out of a southern fairy tale. Marcus stood tall in a navy blue suit, hand-me-down from his brother, but pressed like it was brand new. He smiled in that steady, grateful way, like a man who knew second chances didn't come often, and when they did, you better say thank you. The guests were sparse. A few of Marcus's church friends sat in folding chairs, fanning themselves and trading whispers. His sister, Patrice, was there but barely. She clutched her purse in both hands and didn't smile once. Celeste's side of the aisle was empty. When Pastor Willis asked if anyone had reason to object, the cicadas in the trees buzzed louder than the crowd. No one stood. No one spoke. Then, by the power vested in me, the pastor said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Celeste leaned forward. Their kiss was gentle, nervous even. Marcus felt her body trembling against his. He squeezed her hand in reassurance. "You're safe now," he whispered, unaware how hollow those words would soon feel. That night, they drove to the motel Marcus had booked near Natchez, a quaint riverfront spot with a view of the Mississippi and a hot tub suite. He carried her over the threshold like a man possessed by old-fashioned charm. But once the door closed, something shifted. Celeste sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Her hands clenched the edge of her gown. She hadn't said much during the drive, blamed it on exhaustion and heat. But now, with just the two of them and the world quiet around them, the silence stretched long and awkward. "You okay, baby?" Marcus asked, loosening his tie. "Yeah," she said quickly, too quickly. I don't want to rush tonight." He sat beside her. "You nervous?" "No, just it's been a big day. My head's all over the place." Marcus tried to hide the disappointment in his eyes. He had waited, respected her boundaries during the whole courtship. He was raised to believe patience was love. But tonight, patience tasted a little like rejection. "Of course," he said, brushing a curl from her face. "We got forever." Celeste leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you." But she didn't undress, didn't lie down, just sat there until she fell asleep upright, still in her wedding dress. The following weeks were a strange blend of sweetness and distance. Celeste moved into Marcus's modest home on Maplewood Avenue. She kept it spotless, cooked dinner by 6. She even took a liking to Marcus's gospel vinyl collection, often humming along as she cleaned. But something was off. She still wouldn't let him touch her. Not really. A peck on the cheek here, a hug from behind there, but nothing deeper. Every time he tried to initiate intimacy, she pulled away gently. "I just need time," she'd whisper. "It's not you, Marcus. Please don't take it personal." At first, he tried to be understanding. He was no teenager. He learned that real love sometimes took a slower road. But after weeks turned into months, he began to question. Patrice wasn't helping. She called often now. "Marcus, I ain't trying to ruin your happiness. But you don't know that woman." "I know enough." "Do you?" "She's my wife, Patrice." Ain't that enough? But even he wasn't sure anymore. There were other signs. One afternoon, he walked in early from work and found Celeste on the phone. She didn't hear him come in. Her voice, usually warm and careful, had dropped into something deeper, sharper. "No, I told you I can't talk about that now." "Not here." "No, he doesn't know anything." She snapped the phone shut when she noticed him and flashed a nervous smile. "That was just a friend from back home," she said, brushing past him with a kiss on the cheek. Drama. Marcus didn't push, but something twisted in his gut that didn't go away. Later that night, as he sat on the porch alone with a tumbler of bourbon, he looked up at the stars and whispered, "Lord, what did I just marry?" Then came the rumor. It started with Deacon Harris, who mentioned over dominoes that someone saw Celeste at a clinic on Broad Street, the one that handled discreet cases. He said it in a low voice, just loud enough to let the suspicion hang in the air. "She got that look," the deacon said, shaking his head, like she hiding something heavy. Marcus dismissed it outright in the moment. But at home, lying beside a wife who never undressed in front of him, who turned her back at night and locked her phone during the day, the doubt grew legs. He remembered her words before the wedding. "You sure you want all this baggage?" He thought she meant a rough childhood, maybe some bad choices in Baton Rouge. He never imagined the kind of baggage that could unravel a man's soul. Still, love, or what he thought was love, kept him silent until his body began to fail, and the truth would no longer wait behind whispers. It started small, a cough that wouldn't quit, a chill that clung even when the Mississippi heat pressed against the windows. Marcus figured it was allergies, maybe a late summer flu. He'd never been one to run to doctors. He was old school, the kind of man who rubbed Vicks on his chest and kept moving. But then came the night sweats. He'd wake up drenched, sheets soaked through like he'd been pulled out a river. His weight began to drop without trying, 10 pounds in 2 weeks. His joints ached. His gums bled when he brushed. Still, he told no one. Not Patrice, not Pastor Willis, and certainly not Celeste. He didn't want to worry her. Or worse, make her think he was weak. One afternoon, while fixing a busted railing at the church steps, Marcus collapsed. Just dropped like a stone. He came to in a hospital bed, and 4 in his arm, and a nurse with tight curls and tired eyes leaning over him. "Mr. Dean," she said gently, "we ran some tests. Your immune system's dangerously low." "Low," he croaked, voice scratchy like sandpaper. "I just need fluids, right?" The nurse paused, then quietly stepped aside as a doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand, lips pressed tight. "Mr. Dean," the doctor said, voice flat but kind, "your results show you're HIV positive." The words didn't land at first. Not really. It was like hearing static on a broken radio. "That can't be right," Marcus muttered, sitting up. "I haven't. I ain't been with nobody but my wife." Silence. "We'd recommend further testing," the doctor offered, clearly used to disbelief. "But the viral load is high. This isn't recent exposure." Marcus stared at the ceiling. His chest burned, not from illness, but from the wildfire rising inside him. He thought of Celeste, of her pushing him away in bed, of the clinic rumors, the guarded phone calls, the way she flinched whenever he reached for her hand. She knew. She'd known all along. Back home, Marcus didn't confront her right away. He watched, waited, studied the way she moved around the kitchen like everything was normal, like she hadn't infected the man who gave her his name, his trust, his heart. 3 nights after the diagnosis, as Celeste dried dishes with her back to him, Marcus broke the silence. "You ever been tested?" he asked quietly. She froze. "Tested for what?" She replied without turning. "You know what?" The plate in her hand slipped and shattered in the sink. She still didn't face him. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I'm positive, Celeste." His voice cracked, then steadied with fire. "I got HIV." She turned slowly. Her face had gone pale. Eyes wide. Lips parted like she might speak, but no sound came out. "How long you been knowing?" he asked, stepping closer. "Marcus, Don't lie to me." "Not now." Celeste's knees buckled slightly, and she braced herself against the counter. Tears welled in her eyes, but Marcus didn't move to comfort her. "I've known for years," she whispered. "Since Baton Rouge. But I haven't. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me," he shouted, voice echoing off the kitchen walls. "You married me, slept in my bed, shared my food, my life. You stood in front of God and swore to love me, and you gave me a death sentence." Celeste broke then, collapsed to the floor, sobbing, gasping between words. "I thought if I told you, you'd leave. No one ever stays, Marcus. No one ever stays when they know." Marcus stared down at the woman he thought he loved. Her makeup had streaked. Her eyes were swollen, and yet she still looked like a stranger. "You should have given me the choice," he said coldly. "You robbed me of that. You took my life without pulling a trigger." He walked out that night, drove for hours, ended up parked near the river, staring at the water like it might carry his pain away. But the ache didn't leave. It rooted itself in his bones. Over the next week, Marcus hired a private investigator. He needed confirmation, needed to know he wasn't crazy. The report came quickly. Celeste Monroe didn't exist before 2012. Before that, there was Lionel D. Monroe, male, born in Baton Rouge. Arrested in 2008 for solicitation. Transferred to New Orleans in 2010. 2 known aliases. 1 positive HIV test on record, sealed but accessible through back channels. Marcus held the file in his hands for nearly an hour before moving. Then he rose, walked to the bathroom mirror, and stared at his own reflection. "You let her in," he muttered to himself. "You let her in, and she let the devil follow." The sickness in his body now had a name, but the sickness in his soul had only begun. The man who walked back in the house on Maplewood Avenue wasn't the same man who had once proposed under the soft porch light of Mount Olive. Something in Marcus Dean had shifted, not cracked, but caved in. He opened the door slowly, like a thief sneaking into his own life. Celeste was at the kitchen table, a half-eaten plate of scrambled eggs in front of her, untouched coffee growing cold. She didn't look up when he entered. "Where you been?" she asked softly. Marcus didn't answer. He dropped the file folder on the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She flinched at the sound. Her fingers gripped the mug tighter. "You want to tell me what this is?" he asked, voice low and brittle. She didn't move. "Lionel D. Monroe," he continued. "Born May 3rd, 1987. Baton Rouge. Arrested. HIV positive. Sealed record, but not sealed enough." Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes were glassy, but no tears fell this time. "I was going to tell you," she said. "When? On our 10th anniversary? Or at my funeral?" Her lips trembled, but Marcus pressed on. "You lied to me. About everything. Your name. Your past. Your body. And now I'm dying because I believed in you." Celeste stood slowly, but her voice stayed calm, eerily so. "I didn't lie about loving you." Marcus laughed, bitter and hollow. "You think love is enough to bury the truth." There was a long pause. Then Celeste stepped closer, placing a hand on the file. Her fingers grazed the edge like it might cut her. "You want the whole truth?" she said quietly. "Fine." She inhaled deeply, as if preparing to bleed out right there on the linoleum floor. "I was born Lionel. My mama called me Lee, but I never felt like a Lee. I ran away at 16. Got by however I could. On the street. You do what you gotta do to stay alive. That's how I got sick. That's how I got lost. Then I saved every dime for surgery. For hormones. For papers. I rebuilt myself. From the inside out. And when I met you, Marcus, for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not as some freak. Not as a mistake. But as a woman." Her voice cracked at that last word. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose what we had. I was going to tell you. I was just waiting for the right time." Marcus's hands balled into fists. "You don't get to decide when a man hears the truth about who he's sleeping next to. About what's crawling through his blood. I wasn't trying to hurt you. You infected me," he roared. "You gave me HIV like it was a wedding gift." The room pulsed with silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. "I take my meds," she whispered. "I thought I was undetectable." "You thought." Marcus stepped back like the air had turned toxic. His jaw clenched, so tight it trembled. "You should have stayed in Baton Rouge. Should have stayed whoever the hell you used to be. 'Cause now, I don't even know what's real." Celeste sank into the kitchen chair, her shoulders slumped. For once, she didn't try to explain. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to salvage. Marcus turned and walked out the front door. Not with fury, but with finality. As if a door in his soul had closed, and there'd be no reopening it. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in his truck under a burned-out streetlight, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. His mind replayed it all. The wedding, the late nights, her laugh, the scent of her skin, the feel of her breath on his neck. Then came the other images, the hospital bed, the test results, the file, the truth. What kind of man was he now? He'd always believed in fairness, in honor. His father taught him to stand on truth, even when it hurt. But nothing in life had prepared him for this. He'd been robbed, not just of health, but of dignity, of trust, of agency. And the thief had kissed him every morning with a smile. "You should have given me the choice," he muttered again to himself, eyes hollow. By morning, he returned home not as a husband, but as a man with a plan. Celeste was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed in a silk nightgown, the soft rise and fall of her chest betraying a peace Marcus could no longer recognize. He stood in the doorway, watching her, something unreadable passing over his face. "You killed me," he whispered under his breath. "Now I gotta decide what kind of ghost I'm gonna be." Then he turned and walked back into the kitchen. He opened the drawer, reached past the knives, past the spoons, pulled out a pen and a pad, and he started writing. Something quiet, something cold, something final. The first words he scribbled were, "Justice doesn't always need a judge. Sometimes it just needs time." And time was something Marcus still had left. For now. In the days that followed, Marcus Dean became a ghost in his own home. He no longer kissed Celeste good morning or shared evening porch talks with jazz drifting from the radio. Meals passed in silence. Eye contact vanished. Even the air between them felt colder, heavier. Like every breath they shared now carried a poison neither of them wanted to name out loud. Celeste tried it first. She'd touch his arm, cook his favorite meals, smothered pork chops, collard greens with vinegar, cornbread warm from the oven. But Marcus never touched the plate. He just sat at the table, staring through her like she was already gone. "I know I hurt you," she whispered one night, "but I'm still here. I'm still me." He looked up, eyes glassy. "That's the problem, Celeste. I don't know who you is anymore." That was the last full sentence he said to her for over a week. In the solitude of his garage, Marcus built his war plan. He didn't want to shoot her. Guns were loud, messy, final in all the wrong ways. Poison, though, that was something else. It was clean, silent, poetic. It started with research, hours online, medical forums, pharmacology databases. He used the church library computer during off hours, typing with cold precision while gospel music played softly behind him. Eventually, he discovered an obscure reference buried in an old toxicology journal about a compound derived from expired antiseptics used in some rural hospitals. When mixed with certain alcohol bases and processed over heat, it produced an internal decay effect, slow necrosis, mimicking an aggressive viral infection. He drove 2 counties over and bought what he needed in pieces, rubbing alcohol from a dollar store, a chemical solvent from a bait shop, old antiseptics from a closed-down clinic being cleared out. No red flags, just another middle-aged man buying cleaning supplies. At night, while Celeste slept in the next room, Marcus cooked it on a hot plate in the shed out back. The compound was clear, odorless. He kept in a mason jar wrapped in duct tape and labeled engine degreaser. And every time he looked at that jar, he whispered the same thing. "She gave me death. I'm just returning the favor." But revenge is never clean. One evening, he found himself standing over her as she napped on the couch. She looked peaceful, like the woman he first met at that gas station. Her hand curled beneath her cheek, her mouth slightly parted. Marcus stared for a long time. "You almost made me believe," he murmured. "Almost." He stepped back into the kitchen and opened the jar. That night, he laced a glass of her favorite wine with the compound, left on the counter with a note. "Thought you might need this after today." He watched from the hallway as she walked in after her shower, towel wrapped around her hair, humming a soft tune. She picked up the glass, paused, then smiled faintly. "Thanks, baby," she called out. He didn't respond. She took a sip, then another, and the countdown began. The next morning, she didn't get out of bed. At first, she thought it was food poisoning. Nausea gripped her hard. Her limbs ached. Her skin flushed, then paled. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching her struggle to lift her head from the pillow. "Something's wrong," she whispered, coughing violently. "Maybe you caught what I got," he said flatly. By evening, her body had started to swell. Her tongue turned gray at the edges. She moaned through the night, drifting in and out of consciousness. She reached for him once, crying out his name. He didn't move. 2 days later, Marcus called 911. "My wife, she won't wake up," he said, voice calm. "I think she's real sick." When paramedics arrived, they found Celeste unconscious, her breathing shallow, her skin clammy and purple at the fingertips. She was rushed to St. Luke's Hospital and pronounced dead within the hour. The attending ER doctor noted severe internal necrosis, something he hadn't seen outside of rare cases involving corrosive toxins. He reported it. The coroner requested a full toxicology panel, and that's when the investigation began. Detective Ruth Calhoun wasn't new to strange deaths, but this one This one stuck to her ribs. She stood over Celeste's lifeless body in the morgue, flipping through lab results while the hum of the refrigeration unit buzzed behind her. Cause of death, systemic tissue decay, source unknown, the report read. Too specific to be natural, too targeted to be random. Then came the kicker. The autopsy revealed microscopic traces of Marcus's fingerprints on the wine glass taken from the scene. Nothing unusual for a husband, unless you knew what to look for. Ruth did. She paid Marcus a visit 2 days later. He opened the door, freshly shaven, house spotless, a calmness that reeked of something artificial. "Mr. Dean," Ruth said, eyes narrowing. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" "You can ask," Marcus replied. "Doesn't mean I got answers." She studied him. "Your wife's death isn't natural. Not even close. You know anything about that?" He smiled just a little, then stepped aside. "Come on in, detective. I think you're going to want to hear the whole story." And for the first time since Celeste had walked into his life, Marcus was ready to tell the truth, his version of it, anyway. He had waited months for someone to ask. Now he finally had something to say. Detective Ruth Calhoun sat across from Marcus Dean in the same living room where Celeste used to hum Sam Cooke songs while folding laundry. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and something colder, sterile, hollow, too perfect. She'd seen scenes like this before. Grieving husbands sitting too still. Crime scenes scrubbed too clean. But what struck her most wasn't Marcus's calm. It was the emptiness in his eyes. Like grief hadn't visited, but something darker had moved in and never left. "Mr. Dean," she said, flipping open her notepad, "your wife died under very unusual circumstances. You called the ambulance, and yet you don't seem surprised by what happened." "I've seen death before," Marcus said flatly. "Buried my wife Lorraine 6 years ago. Cancer took her slow. This was quicker. Quicker, but not natural," Ruth replied, watching him closely. "You said she was sick, but the autopsy showed signs of rare internal decay. The kind that comes from poison, not disease." Marcus didn't blink. Sometimes sickness wears a smile before it kills you. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Marcus, we found your fingerprints on the wine glass Celeste drank from the night before she fell ill. Traces of a compound in the residue that doesn't match anything you'd find in a normal home." He chuckled, low and dry. "Funny thing, detective. She left a lot of things out of this home. Secrets mostly. Like what? Like who she really was. What she really carried. What she passed on to me without ever a skin if I wanted it." Ruth paused. The room tightened. "You're talking about HIV. I'm talking about betrayal." He stood, slow and deliberate, walked to the fireplace, and pulled a small notebook from the mantel. "You want to know what happened? This ain't a murder story. This is a story about a man who trusted too hard and too fast. About a woman who wore a veil to hide what she didn't have the courage to say out loud." He tossed the notebook in her lap. She flipped through it. Handwritten pages filled with timelines, phone numbers, chemical formulas, and a final line scrawled in bold ink. "Truth don't heal what silence infects." Marcus was arrested 2 days later. The district attorney charged him with second-degree murder, intentional but not premeditated in the traditional sense. The forensic team traced the toxin directly to his garage. Lab analysis matched the compound in Celeste's bloodstream with the substance found in a duct-taped mason jar marked engine degreaser. There was no denying it. Marcus had made the poison. He had given it to her, and he had watched her die. The courtroom was packed. On the left sat members of Mount Olive Baptist, faces drawn with disbelief. On the right, 2 LGBTQ+ advocates who'd come down from Atlanta, clutching a photo of Celeste, bright-eyed, laughing alive. Marcus took the stand on the 3rd day of the trial. He didn't ask for sympathy, didn't cry, just looked out across the jury with that same heavy stillness and said, "I didn't kill her because of who she was. I killed her because she took everything from me before I even had the chance to say no. My name, my health, my peace. She didn't give me a choice, so I took mine back." The prosecutor painted him as cold, calculated, called the murder a revenge-killing masked in false morality. The defense argued diminished emotional capacity, betrayal trauma, and psychological collapse after discovering the deception and his terminal diagnosis. The truth sat somewhere in the middle, murky, uncomfortable, and too complex for clean judgment. Celeste's death had ignited a firestorm outside the courtroom. Talk shows debated the ethics. Radio stations lit up with callers, some defending Marcus, others condemning him. A local newspaper ran the headline, "When Love Kills. Husband slays transgender wife after HIV revelation." That word, transgender, became the matchstick. For many, it wasn't just about murder. It was about fear, identity, consent, and whether silence is ever justified when truth could end love. Some said Marcus was a monster. Others said he was a man pushed to the edge. In the end, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, eligible for parole after 20. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Marcus stood tall in his orange jumpsuit and spoke without a quiver. "I didn't ask to be saved from loneliness, just to be handed death in return. I wasn't perfect, but I was honest. That's more than I got back." Then he sat down, and he never looked up again. Detective Calhoun watched from the back row. She didn't cry, but when the courtroom emptied and the last whisper faded, she stepped outside and lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. She hadn't smoked in 10 years. "Too much truth in one room," she muttered to herself. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded photo. Celeste standing beside Marcus on their wedding day, smiling, both of them glowing like they had the world ahead of them. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she lit the edge with her cigarette. The flame curled upward, slow and quiet, just like the way love dies when truth stays buried. The courthouse steps in Jackson had never seen so many camera flashes. Reporters elbowed each other for position. Protesters stood on both sides of the sidewalk, some waving signs that read "Justice for Celeste," others holding hand-painted boards that said "Truth before trust" and "Consent is everything." Inside, the courtroom was quieter, colder. Marcus Dean sat at the defense table in a tan blazer, hands folded tightly in his lap. His face was drawn, lips pursed, eyes sunken, not with fear, but exhaustion. He hadn't cried once throughout the trial, but his silence had grown heavier with each day, like gravity itself was punishing him before the law ever could. The jury had returned after only 4 hours. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Dean, guilty of murder in the second degree." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Celeste's photo, perched on the prosecutor's desk, seemed to stare forward with tragic calm. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't hang his head. He just closed his eyes for a moment, briefly, like he'd already known the verdict long before the words were spoken. Sentencing came a week later. Family members were invited to speak. A woman in a burgundy dress with braided hair took the podium first. Her voice shook. "Celeste was my friend," she said. "She didn't deserve to die like that. I watched her fight to become the woman she wanted to be. Y'all don't know what it cost someone like her to walk down the street and still smile. She loved him, and he killed her." Then came Marcus's sister, Patrice. "My brother was broken," she said, staring straight at the judge. "I'm not saying what he did was right. But Lord, when a man feels like he's been betrayed at the core of who he is, by someone he trusted with his life, sometimes the line between pain and rage gets too thin to see." The judge, an older black man with gray temples and a deep, deliberate voice, called Marcus forward before delivering the sentence. "Mr. Dean," he began, "you took a life in a way both cruel and calculated. But this court also recognizes the emotional weight behind the circumstances. Betrayal cuts deep, but the law is not a weapon for wounded hearts." He paused, then looked directly at Marcus. "You could have walked away. You could have chosen justice through the system. But you chose poison. You chose silence. And for that, you must face the consequences." He sentenced Marcus Dean to 35 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 20. Outside the courtroom, a reporter asked Detective Ruth Calhoun how she felt about the verdict. She took a long breath, looked past the cameras, and said, "A woman died. A man lost his life long before that. This wasn't justice. It was tragedy dressed like it." Then she walked away. In his holding cell that night, Marcus stared at the gray cement wall. No photos, no sound, Just him, the metal sink, and a Bible open to Psalms. He didn't pray for forgiveness. He didn't pray for peace. He prayed for silence. Because that's where everything had begun, and where it would end. Not with screams, not with love, but with silence. The kind that kills slowly from the inside out. The prison mailroom was quiet on Thursdays. The kind of quiet that felt like waiting. Marcus Dean sat alone at a steel table in the corner, reading a letter from Pastor Willis. The handwriting was shaky, written with blue ink and a worn hand. You still got breath in your lungs, Marcus. That means God ain't done with you. You don't have to die bitter. You can still choose grace. Marcus folded the letter gently, then slid it into the Bible that never left his side. He wasn't sure he believed in grace anymore. Not after what he'd done. Not after what had been done to him. He reached for a stub of a pencil and began writing in a weathered composition book. Page after page, his thoughts came out not like confession, but testimony. I didn't kill her because she was transgender. I killed her because she looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me while giving me death. I would have walked with her through hell if she'd just told me the truth. But instead, she made me a lie. The guard called lights out. The cell door slammed shut. Marcus lay on his cot, staring up at the dark ceiling, the cold iron bars casting shadows that looked too much like a wedding veil. Outside the prison walls, the world kept turning. Celeste Monroe was buried under her chosen name. A small headstone marked her grave at a quiet plot just outside of Baton Rouge. It read, Celeste D. Monroe, beloved, brave, becoming. At her funeral, her childhood friend Candace spoke through tears. She just wanted to be loved. All she wanted was to feel whole in a world that told her she wasn't enough. She didn't deserve to die because someone couldn't handle the weight of truth. The video clip went viral. Debates raged again. News outlets brought in psychologists, pastors, trans advocates, and legal experts. Was Marcus Dean a victim of deception or a murderer fueled by fragile pride? Was Celeste a liar or a woman too scared to speak truth in a world that often punished it? No one had clean answers, only echoes. Detective Ruth Calhoun visited the cemetery a few months later. She wore a black coat and stood alone, hands tucked into her pockets as the wind swept through tall grass. She placed a single white rose at the base of Celeste's headstone. Then she knelt and whispered, You didn't deserve to die for being who you were, but you also didn't deserve to carry it all alone. Her voice trembled. She stood, looked back once, and walked away. Some stories don't end with closure. They echo in quiet prisons, in lonely graves, in courtrooms and bedrooms and broken mirrors. They echo in the silence left behind, and in the spaces where truth was buried. A different kind of death always waits. 5 years passed. Marcus Dean grew gray in the beard and slower in his step. At Fort Calhoun Correctional Facility, he taught Bible study once a week, fixed broken chapel benches, and wrote long, unsent letters to the woman he'd both loved and killed. He never spoke Celeste's name aloud, but every Thursday night after lights out, he would open his notebook and write to her anyway. You were the first person who touched my soul after I thought it was buried with Lorraine, and you were the last person I ever wanted to hurt. But I did. I hurt you in a way that can't be undone. You lied, and I broke. And somewhere between those two truths, we both died. In prison, Marcus became a ghost that still walked. A man shaped more by regret than bars. And beyond the walls, the world kept talking about him. In Jackson, a community college started a seminar series titled Truth, Identity, and Consequence, using the case of Marcus Dean and Celeste Monroe as a study in human complexity. One session focused not on the crime, but on the silence before it. A young student raised her hand. Why didn't she just tell him? The professor paused. Because when the truth can get you killed, silence sometimes feels safer. But that's silence. It got her killed anyway, the girl whispered. The room was silent for a beat too long. In Baton Rouge, Celeste's niece, who had never met her, visited her grave. She was 17 and just starting to figure herself out. Her mother had forbidden the trip, but she came anyway. She sat cross-legged in the grass and read aloud from her journal. You didn't get to live fully, but maybe I will. Maybe because of you, I'll stop apologizing for who I am. A breeze swept across the headstone, fluttering the pages in her lap. Detective Ruth Calhoun retired the year Marcus turned 60. She kept one file in her home office, the Marcus Dean case. Not because it was the most gruesome or the most sensational, but because it never let her go. Sometimes she'd stare at Celeste's photo, the one from her wedding day. Not the viral mugshot the media loved. The real one. The one where she smiled like she was finally safe. "You were just trying to live," Ruth would whisper. "But sometimes the world doesn't know what to do with people like you." Back in prison, Marcus asked the chaplain one day, "Do you think the Lord forgives a man who kills the only person he ever let fully in?" The chaplain placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I think the Lord forgives truth. It's the lies we carry too long that eat us alive." Marcus nodded, but said nothing. He just looked out through the bars and thought of veils and vows and the venom of unspoken things. The story of Marcus and Celeste wasn't a headline anymore, but it lived on in whispered warnings, in hushed sermons, in shared pain. It lived in the awkward pause before confession, in the trembling voice of someone saying, "There's something you should know," in the breath held right before truth steps out into the light. Because if there was any lesson left behind, it wasn't about gender or disease. It wasn't even about guilt. It was this: when we fear the truth more than the fallout, we build our own graves. And sometimes the person we love most is the one holding the shovel.